Be vegan, repentant, save your soul.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule.
And we have to do 2 acts of good governance if you want to deal with something like climate or food. You have to A, reduce our footprint on the planetary commons, but B, you have to help the people doing it into a new line of work and into something more sustainable.
Please stay with us to find out more. Today's program will be presented in English with subtitles in Arabic, Alexese, also known as Vietnamese, Chinese, Dutch, English, French, German, Hindi, Hungarian, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Mongolian, Persian, Polish, Portuguese, Punjabi, Romanian, Russian, Spanish, Thai, Turkish, and Urdu. When you hear Ya at E, it means welcome in Dine Bazad, a language spoken by the Navajo people. Ayamachak, the friendly communities of the Navajo Nation, are inspired by your noble virtues. May your faith be ever uplifted in the grace of the divine. The Navajo Nation in the United States extends across more than 70,000 square kilometers of land, spanning parts of Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. Navajos refer to themselves as Dine, or Earth People. The Dine came to this world, which they call the Fourth World, or the Glittering World, after passing through 3 other worlds. They believe in 2 classes of people, the Earth People and the Holy People, or Dayan Dine. The Dayan Dine can be benevolent, as in their placement of the 4 sacred mountains that grace the Navajo land, or they can be agents of retribution. To maintain a positive relationship with the Dayan Dine, the Navajo Earth People must help maintain the balance between Mother Earth and humans. Navajo spiritual practice thus highlights the importance of harmony within oneself and with the Dayan Dine. Sacred ceremonies such as the Blessing Way are dedicated to prayers for peace, harmony, and all good things within the Dine. Traditional sand paintings are often created for these ceremonies, and sacred singing offers further dedication and focused prayer. On November 8, 2009, a climate change conference was held in the U.S. capital of Washington, D.C. to bring attention to the quickest and most effective solution to global warming, the organic vegan diet. Titled Humanity's Leap to the Golden Era, Washington, D.C. Climate Change Conference, the event brought together experts of science and health, as well as international ambassadors, media members, and artists. In addition, engaging video messages on the need to address global meat consumption were contributed by esteemed figures, including former Indian Environment Minister Maneka Gandhi, former European Parliament member Jens Holm, and leading American nutrition scientist Dr. T. Colin Campbell. The highlight of the afternoon was an informative question and answer session via conference with the guest of honor, Supreme Master Ching Hai, who had graciously set aside her busy schedule to discuss ways that humankind could transition toward a brighter era. We now invite you to join us for part 2 of the rebroadcast of the live conference with Supreme Master Ching Hai, titled Humanity's Leap to the Golden Era, Washington, D.C. Climate Change Conference on November 8, 2009 in Washington, D.C., USA.
Now let's find out more about the current climate change situation by watching the following video.
Pictures are worth 1,000 words. Our first guest speaker will give us more insight into the current situation. Dr. Stephen Schneider is a professor of interdisciplinary environmental studies at Stanford University, a senior fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment, and the founder and editor of the interdisciplinary journal Climate Change. He has also contributed to all 4 of the reports of the Nobel Prize-winning United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Schneider.
Thank all of you for coming. It's my task today to try in a short time to sketch out a large number of aspects of the climate change issue. And let me begin by saying, before we try to figure out how to fix it, we got to make sure something's broken. I'm asked all the time, whether talking to Congress or members of Parliament or ministers or media, and also just talking to plain folks, well, is the science of global warming settled? Very standard question. And I always like to try it out on my audiences and see where they are, so we know where we're going to be. I was in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago and asked them, and maybe 70% of people, when I said, not every detail, but the basic ideas, raised their hands. And I tried it in Oklahoma, and maybe only 7% raised their hands. that same information. So people have different perceptions. So with this group, how many here think that the science of global warming is largely a settled and well understood affair? Okay, a fair number. Right. And the reason for that is whenever we're talking about a complex issue like climate change, or where you're talking about health care or delivery of services for sustainable development, there is no single answer. There's a large number of possibilities. And in climate system science, there are components that are well established, where we really do have settled science. I'll give you a few examples. There are components where we've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 possibilities, where we have competing explanations, and there are components that are speculative. And unfortunately, out there in the very confusing public debate, there are interests that deliberately grab a serious, well-established piece of information and state it as the only thing, end of the world, certainty, and then somebody else from, say, an enterprise institute who says, but carbon dioxide, that's a fertilizer of green plants, it's good for you. It's true, it is a fertilizer of green plants, and that also includes weeds, and it also acidifies the ocean, and they forget to tell you that. So you get a parade of end of the world and good for you extremes, which in my view are the 2 lowest probability outcomes. What real scientists do is they separate out into multi-possible outcomes, a wide range of possibilities, and then we assign confidence to these. So what we do is called risk analysis. What can happen? Multiplied times the probability. That's a scientist's job. Whether or not you want to take those risks with a planetary life support system, and whether you care more about protecting sustainability, you care more about protecting short-term return on investment in the coal industry, those are value judgments. Those are not science questions. And those are risk management. And very often out there in the public debate, they get completely confused. And as we all know, when you deal in the world of advocacy, what's the most, leads to those trial lawyer jokes, right? It's not my job to make my opponent's case. And very often that's exactly what so much of the public hears. It hears this, I'm sorry to say, fraudulent debate between end of the world and good for you, instead of framing it the way the scientific community does, which is multiple outcomes, many of which have serious side effects that people need to consider. So with that frame, let me move quickly through the program and try to show you some examples of well-established science. So in the first slide, it points out that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a group of hundreds of scientists from around the world, which writes reports, and these reports get reviewed by literally thousands of reviewers, and every one of those comments has to be justified. I've been a lead author in this 4 times. That we get very frustrated when we see the media grab this report and then weigh it against the opinion of 2 petroleum geologists who were funded to find oil, funded by you-know-which oil company, and they get equal status at the bargaining table because they all have PhDs, and they're not remotely equally credible, not even by a factor of 100. And yet, how are people out there going to know that unless they do the due diligence of looking it up? And that's part of the reason why I've been very unhappy at watching sinking in the polls of people's belief in climate change, because there's another kind of argument, which I'll come to in a minute, about the recent changes. So what has the IPCC concluded? Well, they said that the Earth's warmed up 0.75 C, 1.4 Fahrenheit, since 1850. This is not speculative. This is established beyond doubt. And that's consistent not just with the thermometers of the world, but the rising sea levels as the oceans warm, the melting glaciers, and the fact that plants are blooming earlier a couple of weeks in the spring, those that are changing, and that birds come back on migration. There's a large round of evidence. The rate of increase, according to our theory, should increase with time. That has also happened. And that doesn't prove it, but that's strong circumstantial evidence, and humans are part of the story. And IPCC concluded, based on that and other things that we call fingerprints, that human activity is responsible for most of the warming since the 1970s. This is evidence. Somebody said to me at a talk the other day, I don't believe in global warming. So I simply said, well, do you believe in evidence? Yes. I said, do you believe in the preponderance of evidence? I mean, half of American prudence is based upon civil trials where the standard of evidence is preponderance, meaning more than even. The vast preponderance is determined by those people who actually do the research, is that it's warming and that humans are responsible for most of the last 50 years when we use the atmosphere as a free sewer to dump our tailpipe and smokestack wastes or the emissions that come from land clearing. That is very well established. What else do we know? Well, it's not just the science part itself, it's also what it means. That 0.75 degrees C was predicted literally 30 years ago, and I have a new book out called Science as a Contact Sport just this week, and I tell the story about how 30 years ago this issue was discussed in many hearings. I first testified to then Congressman Albert Gore Jr.'s hearing in 1981 during the Reagan administration on these issues. Nobody can say we didn't know. We knew very well 35 years ago in almost the same terms of the debate now, and what the book is about is why we failed to accomplish the mission. In any case, one of the predictions was there would be longer and warmer summers. That's a prescription for increased forest fires. There's been about a factor of 4 to 5 increase in forest fires in the U.S. West. Now, can we say that's all due to global warming? No, because people have moved where they don't belong, and that creates more fires, and we fought fires allowing the fuel to build up. So like all complicated systems analysis, there are multiple explanations, but global warming is one of the main ones. So again, you have to look at these and try to figure out how to solve them by multiple solutions. Greenland and the Arctic are melting, as we saw in the video, faster than predicted. We're performing an experiment on a laboratory, and that laboratory is Earth, and we and all the other living things are along for the ride, and that's where value judgments and political action takes place. So there's been also an observed increase in the strongest hurricanes and in drought and flood incidents. So what else do we know? So warming is of global mean past 1 or 2 degrees. This is something that becomes in the range that we can expect at a minimum. We have built into the pipeline at least 1 and probably 2 more degrees warming because of the inertia of the system. As a result of that, we're going to have to learn to adapt to that we cannot prevent. And most of the work that's been done in the scientific community suggests that beyond 1 or 2 degrees, it gets very difficult to adapt. In fact, if you're a coral reef, it's already getting difficult to adapt. So it depends what the system is and where. Some systems can go beyond 2, some can't even get to 2, and the more and more we keep adding, the more the number of thresholds that we're going to cross where adaptation is no longer possible. So a major component in the Copenhagen meeting will be trying to get strategies to help us adapt. But remember, while we have to adapt to what we can't prevent, we have to prevent what we can't adapt to. So adaptation is actually the other side of the coin, and it tells you need to mitigate, and you need to mitigate down to 1 or 2 degrees, which means a dramatic change from the current way of producing our energy systems. That can't happen in a decade, but it certainly can happen in a few decades, and this decade cannot be wasted like the last 30 years arguing about it. We've got to move forward. Well, here's the picture of the unequivocal. That's the warming of the last century and a half. And what's interesting about that is if you look at the very right end, you'll notice that since 1998, there hasn't been much warming. It's absolutely amazing, the disinformation associated with that. All over the blogs, the webs, and unfortunately the media gives it credibility. People have said, well, it hasn't warmed since 1998, yet we've been increasing greenhouse gases, therefore we falsified global warming. This complete nonsense, because if you look from 1992 to 2002, it warmed up so fast. What we're looking at is a natural variability superimposed on a multi-decadal trend. The multi-decadal trend is due to human activities predominantly. The short-term fluctuations due to nature. The biggest problem is the tipping points. How many degrees warming before the meltwater in Greenland that goes down will lead to the point that it actually moves toward an irreversible, can't stop it melt with something like 4 to 5 meters of sea level rise. Unfortunately, nobody knows where that tipping point is, only that it exists. My own personal view, 25% chance if we warm it another degree, 60% chance 2 degrees, 90% chance 3 degrees. Sounds like I'm an optimist, right? We have a whole bunch of degrees to go. I wouldn't rule that at 1 to 5%, it's already too late. So Are we crazy? We're talking about the planetary life support system, and there are people who want to be 95% certain before acting on the grounds that it isn't proved. Well, even if there were a 5% chance that walking into a room with somebody coughing where you wanted to get your dinner, you were going to get the swine flu, you'd skip dinner. We hedge all the time on low probability outcomes when they're highly consequential, and it's a false frame to say that it isn't proved because every single detail is not in. What can we do? Well, our lifestyle matters. We have to be energy efficient at home. We have to make certain we're good consumers of products, that we read the labels, that we buy the Energy Star, that we try to get the hybrid and the plug-in cars. We use less imported foodstuffs, and for me personally, I've also reduced my meat consumption. I lost weight and feel much better. Making significant difference matters. So the advocacy of this organization on eating fruits and vegetables, that's aligned with the advocacy of helping local jobs and reducing our carbon footprint. So if you can solve more than one problem at once, well, those that get high priority. And we have to do 2 acts of good governance if you want to deal with something like climate or food. You have to, A, reduce our footprint on the planetary commons, but B, you have to help the people doing it into a new line of work and into something more sustainable. That calls for 2 acts of good governance, not just protecting the commons, but being fair. So we've got to do both. We can, but we have to work at it, and we have to find cooperative solutions, or there'll be no hope. What we should be talking about, the numbers, is how many tens of billions of dollars are each of the principal players going to pay to help us invent our way out of the problem and help the developing countries leapfrog over the polluting Victorian Industrial Revolution. We need deployment of clean technology. We need sensible rules for energy efficiency. We need a polluter pays market-based thing. Every single one of those, efficiency, invention, and market-based and adaptation, is a necessary condition. None by itself is sufficient. So let's conclude then. Adaptation planning, performance standards for buildings, public-private partnerships, price on carbon, and remember, just as I said, when you have to deal with the agricultural workers, you also have to deal with the coal miners. We cannot just say, no, you can't do this, goodbye, too bad. We have to work to help them transition to sustainable work. The bottom line, this is not just about us. This is our legacy to our children, grandchildren, and all the other living things on this earth. Remember, the plants and animals and our children had very little to do with creating this problem. We created it. We have to teach them to solve the problem well. They have to join with us to do it, and we have to ask them, what do they want? A legacy of wealth and infrastructure, or a legacy of biotic impoverishment, reduced diversity in culture and nature just to be richer? I'll bet, from what the students I've met, they're much less interested in being mega wealthy than they are in having a planet that works. Thank you very much.
Our deep appreciation, Dr. Schneider, for sharing with us the urgency of the climate change crisis and the steps we need to take to avoid the final tipping point.
Hi, I'm Stephen Schneider, and I'm on the faculty at Stanford University, where I study climate change and how it happens naturally, what we do, what to do about it. And since we're talking about the planetary life support system, this is not something to gamble with. And there are lots of things that we can do in our personal lives, ranging from what kind of cars and appliances we buy, what kind of diet we have, what kind of knowledge we gain about the problem, whether we go to our town councils and try to advise them to green up their towns. The main thing that I'd like people to understand is you do not have to have a problem entirely solved before you act. When somebody says, oh, we're not 95% certain, so let's wait until we're 95% certain, the point is it's absolutely absurd to argue that we don't have it proved because we don't have it to 95 or 99% certainty. That's a trick of those people who want to maintain market share. When we're talking about the planetary life support system, a 1% chance of catastrophic outcome is too high.
I've turned into a vegetarian myself now.
Oh, have
Hopefully
you?
a vegan when it's all
Oh.
over with, because I know that it contributes a lot to global warming, the methane gas from the cows and all the animals. But everybody has to get on board. It's just not me and you and
Right.
5,000 other people. It's got to be millions of people have to join this cause.
It was definitely the methane versus carbon dioxide and the 1,000 gallons of water it takes to make a gallon of milk is definitely just like a short random fact that definitely sticks out in your mind.
I just am reminded how important it is to be compassionate, and I understand about the importance of being a vegetarian or vegan, but it's encouraged me to share it with other people. Just hearing all of these incredible speakers today has just really opened my eyes. We need to do something now, and that's what's so wonderful about being vegan is it can be really almost an immediate change.
I was really surprised at how much the meat industry really impacts global warming and climate change, and the way that stacks up against carbon emissions from traditional sources like transportation. That's what we usually think global warming comes from. But the fact that the meat industry and just cows and just when you go grab a hamburger, I had a ham sandwich this morning and I was like, wow, I shouldn't have. I second guessed myself on that. Just the fact that those things impact the world so much it's a big deal. I think that there's definitely a chance that people will take a lot away from this conference, and I know I personally was touched by all the talking about veganism and vegetarianism. I'm considering becoming a vegetarian after this. I think that's a step a lot of people can take, and I really think that it could help make a difference.
Be veg, go green, save the planet.
All information concerning the scientific evidence of climate change and its solution is in Supreme Master Ching Hai's book, From Crisis to Peace, free for download at crisistopeace.org.
Serene viewers, thank you for your presence today on Words of Wisdom. Please join us tomorrow for part 3 of this conference with Supreme Master Ching Hai. Coming up next is Carbon Works, the music of Dr. Neil Bernard, vegan, right after noteworthy news. In the boundless love of the Providence, may all your noble aspirations be realized.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule and suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Nos programmes offrent plusieurs langues. Veuillez visiter suprememastertv.com/schedule et suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Nuestros programas ofrecen varios idiomas. Visiten suprememastertv.com/schedule y suprememastertv.com/WOW.
మా కార్యక్రమాలు అందజేస్తున్నాయి అనేక భాషలలో. దయచేసి చూడండి suprememastertv.com/schedule మరియు suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Be vegan, make peace.